We are so excited to have Rabbi Erez Sherman with us this morning. Rabbi, tell us a little bit about sport in your life.
Yeah, so I grew up in Syracuse, New York in the 80s and 90s. So Big East at its best with Derek Coleman, Billy Owens, Coach Jim Boeheim. On the football side, Coach Dick McPherson, Pasqualoni, players like Donovan McNabb, Dwight Freeney, Hall of Famers. They were my Lakers. I'm rabbi in Los Angeles now. College sports was everything. We lived about a mile and a half from the Carrier Dome, now the JMA Wireless Dome, but it's still the Carrier Dome for all those who remember the Big East of those days. Never missed a game, and we had a really strong connection because my dad is also a rabbi, and so we had connections with the basketball team, with the football team, and actually on the faith side, anybody who is Jewish within the sports world ended up at our synagogue, at our table for Sabbath dinners and holiday dinners, and so it was sort of this combo. Not just loving the sport, but really actually forming community around those sports. And I know you guys are in Michigan and Syracuse in the dead of winter. Wow, we needed those games desperately to get through some dark
Yeah,
days outside and some freezing times.
no doubt.
What a golden era of Syracuse sports that you lived through. How cool. So you
Yeah,
alluded to this a little bit, but tell us a little bit more about faith in your life.
for sure. So my dad is also a rabbi. Actually, my sister's a rabbi. Now my wife is a rabbi, so a bit of a family business. But my dad, as I said, was connected with the university and the sports teams. And so I always say the word that I knew was and, not or, meaning it was always faith and sports. And so we always went to the synagogue on the Sabbath on Saturdays. And my friends knew that if they went to the synagogue, then they would actually come with me for amazing tickets that we had, basically courtside for basketball. And as I said, those freezing winters, within the Jewish religion, the traditional Jews, we don't drive on the Sabbath day. And so they understood that we were walking. So it was about, in between 1 and 3 miles, depending where we are coming from. It was freezing, but we knew what the end goal was, to be in those seats and to experience some unbelievable battles on the court. And I saw many people within my synagogue community would be at the games and be like, well, Rabbi, your son was there. And it's like, yes, but the accommodations that I made for my faith life in order to experience the sports life was pretty amazing. And then my other piece, I'm one of 5 kids, and I had a brother of blessed memory who passed away in 2017. He was disabled. He was a quadriplegic for 32 of his 36 years. And the way that the sports community rallied around him, he had an open pass to Coach Boeheim's basketball practices, to football practices, and as much as the team did for him, what he did to inspire the team was really, really special. And so, in Judaism, we have something called Bikor Cholim. It's visiting the sick. Well, I can't name a time when my brother was in the hospital when there was not a coach or a player who took time out of their day to go to the pediatric ward in Syracuse and visit him. So it was a seamless transition, or it was no transition. It was just faith and sports. It was synagogue and Syracuse basketball and football, and so there was no way of ever combining them. They just were.
So there's a lot to go on there. That's fantastic, without a doubt. And I can't wait to get into how that sort of translated into the work that you do now. But first, I want to go back and just say, first, you didn't mention yourself holding the rock at all. Did you play any basketball?
So I went to a small private school, a secular private school in Syracuse, New York, called Manlius Pebble Hill. They were in the news this week because I think they lost 35 straight over 3 seasons.
Ooh,
We were actually 1-19 our senior year. Yeah, I know. But it was a small enough school that you mattered. So there were no cuts, meaning, I wasn't, I was all county, I was all league in this very small league that we were playing. But when you're playing in a school like that, like, if you don't show up, then nobody does. You can't even have a team. So that's where the love of the game started, by obviously watching sort of my heroes on the court, but then actually playing. I went to Coach Boeheim's basketball camp for many, many years. I got to sort of be around that culture. And then during rabbinical school, actually, when some of my friends were having internships at synagogues, I was refereeing at Coach Boeheim's basketball camp. It was the best minimum wage job I ever had in my life. And so many of the relationships that I formed in those 4 summers were actually what I use today when I started bringing sports into the faith world as a rabbi myself in a larger city in Los Angeles.
So fond and glowing memories of a 1 in 19 team. That is pretty rare. I like that. Interesting that your memories bring you to a place of joy, even though it's just loss after loss after loss. But in many ways, you talk about the community, and I'm sure that that's going to be part of your existing work as well. Is there one thing about yourself that might help? These are pretty unique things. You're our first rabbi, so uh, already there's a number of unique things. But is there one other thing that maybe our listeners could know about you that would help them get to know you?
Yeah, so I think that special needs world is really important in my life. It guided everything. As a child of a rabbi who grew up in a family that had a severely special needs sibling, it defined me theologically. It defined how I deal with suffering. It defined how I deal with community. And sports was that other communal piece that was just so inspiring, that was allowed us an escape. But now that I look back 30 years later, allowed us a way to come together and to meet other people that we would not have met otherwise. There's two great stories with my brother Eyal of blessed memory. Syracuse made the Final Four in '96 with John Wallace and Otis Hill and that crew. And they beat Georgia at the buzzer. I'm like reliving that moment in my mind in my living room, jumping up and down. And 2003, of course, the championship with Carmelo Anthony. And each of those, my brother was at the practice the day before they left for the Final Four, and Coach Boeheim gathered them around and told his players, we're going for a national championship in NCAA, but what's as most important is what you're doing for kids like this. And so the special needs world is just a huge piece of my life. And even after my brother passed, actually when my brother passed, one of the first condolences notes were from the Syracuse basketball family. So that's the third sort of a trifecta that defines me as a rabbi, as a human being, as somebody who wants to inspire other souls.
Well, that resonates with us as well. We both work at universities that have heavy investments in the disability world, and we have friends and connections that talk about disability sports. So those are really great things that we can continue to talk about. You're known as the rabbi on the sidelines. Obviously, I want to talk about the sidelines, but I'm kind of clueless here. What is the pathway to becoming a rabbi?
Yeah, so it's after you have a BA. I got my BA at Columbia University, actually a double major in music of all things, and Jewish studies. And then afterwards, it's 5 years of seminary study. I went to the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in New York on 122nd and Broadway. And throughout those 5 years, you spend 1 year living in Israel. And actually, when I was in Israel, I met some really amazing athletes. A lot of American athletes playing in Israel. It's one of the best leagues outside of the United States. Maccabi Tel Aviv. Obviously, you've probably heard of Denny Avdia, who was the first Israeli All-Star, who's making news this week. And so it's 5 years of study, with again one of them in Israel, and then you have internships and things like that. And then you go to a synagogue. It's not like the Catholic Church where the diocese places you. You apply for jobs. My wife is from Los Angeles, and so she brought me to some really beautiful sunny weather. She brought me to a place, before she brought me to the synagogue, she brought me to Pauley Pavilion, which is just down the street. She knew what she was getting
She
into.
did?
I went to the UCLA Arizona game in like 2008. It was amazing. Now it's the new Pauley Pavilion. Now as much as I'm an Orange fan, my kids are now pretty amazing Bruin fans. But we were a split synagogue of Trojans and Bruins, and so we got to be really careful from the pulpit when we talk about who we're rooting for.
Following the Big Ten nonetheless, though, I guess, right, with those two
Yes.
schools now realigning their conferences. Um, so you become a rabbi? What's the market like for the overlap between Judaism and sport, right? So Brian and I are familiar with the overlap of sport and Christianity, which is quite large in the United States, especially. We're familiar with scholars who are studying, the history of Judaism and sport. What's the market like right now for someone in a position like you who has a really strong interest in sport and has gone to rabbinical school?
Yeah, so when I came out here in 2009, I realized that a lot of the kids from the Jewish community were going to basketball camp, were just like me growing up. When you talk to a bar mitzvah, a young person who's going to be a rite of passage, I always say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they say an NBA player. I said, okay. Very funny book in the movie Airplane when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is in that movie and he tells the first class passenger, they said, I'd like some light reading. He says Jews and sports. He gives a little pamphlet. Um,
That's right.
yeah, so
Yeah.
that's the stereotypical piece of Jews in sports. But what I realized was, what if we brought our Jewish students actually to our communities and did high-level basketball and high-level values? And by values, I mean different social action projects, interacting with other faith communities. And so when I got to Sinai Temple in 2014, I came into a beautiful physical building. We have, at that time, 3 gymnasiums, and all summer long they were sitting empty. And I knew the kids were at Lakers camps and Clippers camps and UCLA camps. And I was like, what if they came to the synagogue and we did high level basketball, high level values? And so I Googled Syracuse basketball alumni in Los Angeles, and I found a couple of former walk-ons trying to make it as Hollywood stars. And I said, hey, if I give you a couple dollars, will you come and speak about your inspiring journey? And one by one, these relationships sort of like came back to life. We packed the house for 5 years, about 80 kids a week in our gyms. The head of the camp was not Jewish. He's an amazing African American coach, Coach Jay. And he was learning about our religion and culture, and I was learning about his culture. And then I partnered with my friend Pastor John Paul Foster from Inglewood at Faithful Central Bible Church, and I said, what about bring your kids over here? We have the space, and you have these amazing connections. And the camp just grew out of control. The whole NBA is out here during the summer. And so through different relationships, we're able to bring different players like Courtney Lee and Karam Butler, and they started speaking to the kids about their own faith journeys, and we're really onto something. And then COVID hit, and there was no more camp. And so I thought to myself, you know what? Through my Syracuse relationships back in the day and what my dad showed me, Zoom to YouTube just became a thing. Like, wow, we can like talk to the world. And I thought, what if I ask people in the sports world, they don't have to be Jewish, not what's in the trade deadline or box score, but what's in your heart and soul. And let's see what happens. And my first guest was Steve Hyder, who to me was like the Dick Vitale growing up of my local piece. My brother, Eyal, and I would sit courtside right behind Steve Hyder. He didn't know us, and we would wear headsets just like you, and we would imitate him, and knew all his calls. And I saw an article that he needed a kidney transplant. And so I reached out on Facebook, and I was like, Steve, you don't know me. I was a little kid, but like you were my idol growing up, and I'm just sending you a blessing. And he wrote back to me saying, oh my God, I wish I knew you. Thank you so much for this blessing. He ended up having the kidney transplant from his cousin. And then there was an article that said, Coach Jim Boeheim reached out to me, and there was even a rabbi who blessed me from Los Angeles. And I said, Steve, I've never met you. Can we do this Zoom thing? And our first episode, January 2021, was with Steve Hyder. Steve Hyder has since passed away from after the transplant, but he was really an amazing angel that allowed me to sort of start this Rabbi on the Sidelines. And from there, it was just relationship based. My good friend is the rabbi of Dan Schulman from ESPN, who my friend doesn't know much about sports. He's like, do you want to talk to Dan? Dan was stuck in Charlotte during COVID doing Duke, North Carolina games. He's like, yeah, of course I'll talk to you. And from there, I very quickly ended up with all of ESPN College Game Day and different things like that. And it was actually the special needs piece that connected me to a lot of people. And one of those was Ernie Johnson, who's since become a good acquaintance based on his son Michael of blessed memory, and my brother, who were very similar in the physical disability. And then I did not realize Ernie's faith, and that led to a whole other sort of journey as well.
Yeah, it's a fascinating journey, and it's really quite young yet. You have not been at this very long, and yet a lot of different connections where you've put yourself in a variety of different communities and building new community along the way. I do want to kind of come back to this disability piece. What is it about sport that seems to resonate in that space, or maybe it's basketball in particular that seems to resonate in that space? So how have you observed that?
Yeah, you're bringing me back to some really amazing memories. So my brother was not on my basketball team, even though he's a year older, but he would come to every game, and our gym was like tiny, and so he would be right on the sidelines. And I remember one time when he had an electric wheelchair, and he would drive it with his chin. And one time a guy was going down the court, and mistake or not, he sort of wheeled on the court, and the referee had to stop. And actually, he saved us 2 points, so that's one. But actually, growing up, we also did Challenger baseball, and so on my mainstream Little League team, he was the third base coach. He would wear the uniform, sit in his wheelchair, and he would sit with my dad and wave and stop and everything like that. And then on the Challenger Little League team, which Jim Abbott was really inspirational in creating, I would push him around the bases and hold the ball like that. And so, same thing, just as faith and sports were the same thing was going to be with the disability. When my mom, who really was, I think, one of the first ones to think about adaptive technology, when the gym teacher in his public school said, "Oh, he can just sit out for these 45 minutes in PE class," she said, "What sport are we playing?" "Oh, we're doing floor hockey." Great. She taped a broom to his wheelchair, and he became floor hockey. So just to think about how to be inclusive. And then in the 90s, the coach Boeheim sort of gave us like pen pals, and one of them was John Wallace. And before every game, John Wallace would hop over the press row and say hi to my brother and just thinking about him. And even after losses, I remember vividly going to a practice after Syracuse lost to Seton Hall by a couple of points. And we went to practice and like, oh no, we don't want to talk to them. Like, they're really intense. And the first thing he did was come over and said hi. And so just the way that these young people give their souls to these athletes and what it does for them is really beautiful. And over the years, I've definitely seen it with the Syracuse team, but over so many times as well. When I go to Lakers games, Clippers games, what the athletes are willing to give based on what they see. What I found out after 200 episodes of Rabbi in the Sidelines is athletes are much more than their talent on the court. They are true champions of the soul when they not when they have to do the right thing, but when they know the right thing to do. And it's just a really beautiful thing to watch.
The disability piece that you're talking about is based on personal experiences, right, with your brother. And that's such a cool part of your story and your family's story. And I think really, speaks well to the Syracuse athletics community that you guys were engaged with, right? I mean, in that part of the country, there's nothing bigger than Syracuse basketball. At least there wasn't in the 90s and early 2000s. You have developed a platform now whereby you're connecting with much more than just the Syracuses of elite athletics, right? And doing so from the platform of your faith-based leadership. What would you say to faith leaders who are thinking about stepping into this space, right, of elite sport or connecting with elite athletes or connecting with sort of large scale sports programming? What is it that they can learn by stepping into that space?
Yep. So two things. About 10 years ago, Syracuse walk-on. I keep saying Syracuse, but so many of the relationships that led to what I'm doing today happened because of those experiences, as you said. His name is Todd Burak. He was a walk-on. He called me. He went into wealth management, and he was like, "Have you heard of KEEN? Kids Enjoying Exercise Now." It's a national organization. And I said, "No." He said, "It's about basically doing clinics for kids with special needs." I said, "We have the gym space. Happily, we'll donate the space. Tell me what to do." And here, we're basically in Beverly Hills. I thought it was going to be for the kids in the Jewish community for special needs. And who showed up? It was mostly low-income Hispanic families from East LA that would come all the way up to West LA for this basketball program. And when they walked in our building, I realized they needed much more than basketball. Their parents, who were so consumed with their needs, just needed an hour. And so then we would do a fruit truck. We would bring them lunch. Then we would get Spanish translators to talk about the resources that they could have. And so I realized that we were doing much more than basketball. Basketball was the initial engagement to actually meet these people. And then we realized what the needs were. And so for faith leaders, whether it's you love music, great, do it with music. You love ballet, do it with ballet. I happen to be passionate about the ball and the court, and I had the facilities. Could I do this in Iowa or Arizona or New Mexico? Probably at a different level, but I was very, very blessed to be in the physical location and the community that desired this. My predecessor, Rabbi David Wolpe, who's known as the #1 rabbi in the country, he always jokes with me. He said he was the rabbi that kept the gyms empty, and I was the rabbi that filled them up. But I asked him in 2021 when I did the podcast, "Are you okay with the rabbi entering the world of sports?" And he told me, he said, "Please do it, because your voice will be needed. But we just don't know when." And it has been needed, whether it's special needs, and a big thing over the last few years has been anti-Semitism. That we've been able to connect with people who are not Jewish to not necessarily just say support the Jewish community, but have relationship with. when unfortunately some NBA athletes have done some things with anti-Semitism. One beautiful thing happened was Myers Leonard, who was kicked out of the NBA, basically for saying an anti-Semitic slur. He, when he did that and understood his mistake, came to the Jewish community and said, I want to learn about you. And Myers came to Sinai Temple, and he came to our school where he was watching the kids in their daily worship with literally tears in his eyes. And he told me, he said, this moment, he said, my biggest mistake has been my biggest blessing. I think that's a beautiful faith message, no matter if you're Christian, Hindu, Jewish, Muslim, it doesn't matter, that our mistakes can become our blessings, and our blessings can also lead to so many more blessings as well. So my message to faith leaders, whatever your passion is, use that passion to engage. If you're waiting for people to enter your sanctuaries, in today's world, that's really hard. You can stream a worship service. I watch churches and synagogues everywhere because personally I find it fun and engaging. But how do you get them in? And when we started streaming our worship services in 2020, there was a big debate. Nobody's going to come. And why did we continue streaming? Because of a sports analogy. When I was a kid and I saw the Carrier Dome filled up and I knew I didn't have a ticket, it made me want to go even more. And so we see even today when we stream worship services, if you create the right experience in the room, people don't want to watch it on TV. They want to be in the room. And I think that's been a really key moment of sort of bridging sports and entertainment and also religion. And in fact, in 2020, on our biggest holidays, when we usually have 5,000 people here, we had nobody. Rabbi Wolpe said to me, we have to stream, but it has to be better than just a cell phone. And so what did I do? I found producers at ESPN and Fox that I said, make our worship service the Final Four. And the way that they produced it was, the last piece of that was actually One Shining Moment style of our holiday season. And what people told us afterwards were, I thought I was going to go on Zoom and just turn it off after 5 minutes. And after 3 hours, I wanted to continue. So many overlaps between these faith and sports communities that I highly encourage our faith leaders to engage people where they are. Because you can bring them this way, you can't necessarily send them out the other way.
Everybody's got to stay for that one shining moment, right? They're not going to miss that. Well, clearly the sort of the secret sauce of what you're doing is community. You're building community in lots of different places. You are doing that with youth, with kids with disabilities, with families, all those sorts of things. And I think that that's central to who you are. I'm picking that up already. You're also engaging with high-level athletes, people that are adjacent to the sport community, and you're asking them good questions. So I have kind of a two-part question here. So what are you noticing from that community that you think they really need or is missing in their lives? And then secondly, is that unique for a Jewish athlete or Jewish coach, announcer, those sorts of things?
So the first part, after interviewing so many people, and I know you both do this as well, what I found is that when I hear an inspiring story, I'm a connector in my life. I like to say I'm the human Facebook, even though Facebook is now old school, but it came out when I was in college. And I think the mutual friends button, like, oh my gosh, I heard Brian's story, and then I heard Chad's story, but do you guys know each other? And often I found out these stories don't know each other. I was blown away. I'm like, wait, I watch you on TNT, and I watch you on ESPN, and I see you on NBC, but you've never spoken to each other? Whoa. And so that's where this idea of FCS, Faith, Connection, and Sport came. That what if we had the right time to actually gather all the people in the same room and have the conversation? Usually I'm sending this podcast to that person, you should meet and this and that. But no, you can be in the same room. And so when I found that happening, what I envision is from things like we just created of the FCS, Faith, Connection, and Sport Conference, is that this will lead to other things beyond the room. Last week at 3 o'clock when we finished our conference, nobody left. It's because they were craving the human connection between each other. And I watched it happen. I'm like, I saw the roster of who was going to walk in the room, but then I saw who was actually connecting with each other. So Josh Powell, the two-time Laker, was connecting with, Dean Varun Soni, the head of USC Religious Life, and he was connecting with the Muslim Mansur Langari, who's doing Jewish Muslim Unity in New Jersey, and all these emails are flying back and forth about how what are the next steps. So that part was crucial about actually how to have the conversation in person. I know you have the Sports and Christian Conference as well. It has to be about the live connection. In terms of the Jewish aspect, this conference was hosted at a synagogue. It was created by a rabbi, but it wasn't a Jewish conference. This wasn't. Yes, we had Tamir Goodman, known as the Jewish Jordan, who's a good friend of mine, who's doing amazing things. But as many people spoke about Jesus than they did as God in the Torah. And that was okay. And it was very interesting because some people are like, ooh, I'm uncomfortable. They're using these terms and I'm using these terms. But that's fine because I want you to be as strong in your faith as I am in my faith. Often people say it's interfaith, but my good friend Reverend Johnny Moore says interfaith sort of dilutes, multi-faith strengthens. And we can have multi-faiths doing this. I think it's a beautiful thing. My dad, again, who's a rabbi, he used to always be asked to do the blessing at the annual hardwood dinner, which was right before they went to the Big East tournament, at the end of the year kickoff. And I always was interested in like which prayer he would give, and it was used from our own tradition, but it had meaning to others. And I love when I can learn from other traditions, even though it might not be my own theological belief. In the huddle, those sort of differences go away, but at the same time, they can learn from each other. And so when I ask people who are Jewish in sports, I always ask, what is it like in the locker room? What are they talking about? And often they tell me, most people just don't know about the other. And so sport is a way to bring the other to each other. And growing up in Syracuse, that was how the others were brought to me. It was through the sports arena. It wasn't in my synagogue, but it was taking what I learned in the synagogue to the court, and not in a proselytizing way. Just, this is who I am, this is who you are. On my basketball team, there was a Seventh-day Adventist, and so we shared not playing on Friday nights together, even though we had very different religious beliefs. So it's how to be multi-faith on the court.
Seems like in all that you're doing, right, pulling together community around sport, around disability, around family needs, around faith, whatever else, one of the things that you've identified is this ability for sport to help build bridges, right, in ways that help us understand what we have in common, right, what we share in common. You called yourself a connector. I'm curious about what it is within the world of sport. You've sort of alluded to the fact that there's something there within sport that pulls us together, right? Some sort of like moral, like shared morality, shared moral language, whatever it might be. How would you articulate what that is? How do you articulate what that is when you're working with groups that have multiple faiths or multiple backgrounds and experiences?
So I think all faith communities share a ritualistic value. So, so many times, even last week, but over the years that I've been doing this, it's sanctuary and locker room, right? That is my sacred space. Seth Greenberg of ESPN, when he was at Long Beach, was talking about that piece. Prayer is an interesting one in sport because Dave Sims, who's now the Yankee announcer, he says, when the guy says, I thank God for that home run, well, does the left fielder say, I thank God for the error? So that's not prayer. And actually, Coach Bob McKillop, who's Steph Curry's college coach from Davidson, who took his team in 2018 to Auschwitz without a basketball, spoke last week, and he talked about prayer when he went to Mass before the game against Rhode Island when Danny Hurley was coaching. And I guess Danny Hurley was a couple rows behind him in Mass. And when they shook hands before the game, Danny Hurley said to Coach McKillop, we canceled each other out. And he said, no, that wasn't the point of Mass. That wasn't the point of prayer. Right? The point of prayer is whatever circumstance you are in, we have the strength to deal with that courage and whatever we're going to go through. So it's not about that, but there's a lot of prayer. I hear a lot about chapel in the NBA, in Federation of Christian Athletes, in the locker rooms. And so the ritualistic aspects, and also community, right? If I'm wearing the kippah, the prayer shawl, the skull cap on my head, and I see somebody else with a kippah on their head on the street, I immediately identify with them. I can have a conversation. Where do you go to the synagogue? Blah, blah, blah. The same thing is true when I wear Syracuse across my chest. I just went to the NBA Crossover Fan Fest with my kids. I purposely, intentionally wore the Syracuse sweatshirt to see what would happen. So who's there? Richard Hamilton. He's signing autographs. It's like an autograph for my kid. The minute he sees that, he's like, oh boy, right? There was an instant connection of, oh, I'm in your world. And then I think the question is, now that we're in those orbits together, what can we do? And we see it in religious spaces all the time: social action centers, feeding the homeless, taking care of the poor, making the world a better place. In our tradition, it's called tikkun olam. It means to fix a broken world. And you see that with sports all the time. Now, my dad also always told me, when I would cry after we would lose a Syracuse game, not the high school games because we would lose every night, but he would say, it's just a game. And then we would look at each other and say, well, or is it really more than just a game? But the game is one thing. What it can lead to is so, so much more. And I can't even imagine now a rabbinic life without sport in my life. Again, not just the wins and the losses on the field, but the unbelievable, inspiring stories. When I hear Lisa, okay, I knew Lisa Leslie, of her. I knew her gigantic prowess in the game. When she tells us last week that her mother was a truck driver, single mother, for the only woman in that field for 5 years, and told the kids, give me 5 years, I'm going to make you a life. And then she explained how she followed her sister to church, and the pastor said, like, you can, make a life for yourself. Like, whoa, what a different, perspective I have on Lisa Leslie, who is just a giant on the court. This is a giant in the world of faith, and I follow her on Instagram, and every other minute she's posting words of scripture of inspiration. Those are ways to build community that I think if people aren't in that, I think they're missing out.
Well, Rabbi Sherman, the work that you're doing resonates so much with us. You're building community. We're building community. We're trying to get everyone in the same room. We're thinking a lot about how groups don't talk to each other and how can we use a platform like ours to try to get people together. I think we even have the same tagline, the intersection of sport and faith. So
Yeah, nice.
I think we had it first, but who's competing here? Uh, So I just want to say to you, God bless what
You
you're
as well.
doing. It's fantastic. I'm really excited to hear about it, and I think we've just scratched the surface. If folks want to learn more about the work that you're doing and your communities, what your communities are producing along these lines, how would they find you? How do they follow your podcast?
For sure. So it's on all the podcast platforms of Rabbi on the Sidelines. I do it live on YouTube. So it's actually youtube.com/Sinai Temple Presents, and also on our website sinaitemple.org. We have a full page of that podcast. It's called Rabbi on the Sidelines. You can Google it. And we're really excited to continue, and most importantly, actually to partner with this type of podcast and these types of communities. I love when other faith communities are doing this. I think the similarity is definitely there, and I think the addition is how do we actually do that. I went to the NBA crossover. I think it's the basketball and sports crossover. Maybe I'll do that instead of the intersection, the crossover of sports and faith, and we can be unique. But I'm really excited to be part of your team, and also, God willing, you be part of our team to make the world a little better than it is each and every day.
Well, thanks so much for being on this podcast on Sport Faith Life. This might be the only time I ever say this, and this is a bit of an inside joke. I'm sorry if you don't get it, but go Orange. We can say that now for you, but not for Chad. That's a little bit. I can't really go down that road. Thanks so much for being with us, and we hope to talk to you again.
Thank you so much.